This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Natalie Edwards. Tonight's top stories. South Korea's ruling Democratic Party pushes through a controversial anti-fake news bill after a 24-hour opposition filibuster. Critics say the legislation could curb press freedom and free speech. The parents of the man accused in Taiwan's deadly stabbing rampage have apologized and vowed to cooperate with investigators. 4 people were killed, including the suspect. A warning shot in the chip war. Washington accuses Beijing of unfair practices in the chip sector, but stops short of immediate tariffs. And China backs Venezuela at the United Nations, accusing the U.S. of using anti-drug operations as a pretext for its military deployments near the South American nation. Also on the bulletin, trade wars, political shakeups, and military posturing. We'll take a look at some of the key moments that shaped East Asia this year and what to expect for 2026. South Korea's parliament has passed a controversial new law targeting the spread of false and manipulated information online. Well, the law allows courts to impose heavy financial penalties on media outlets and online content creators who intentionally spread disinformation. Our CNA senior correspondent Lim Yun-suk has more.
South Korea's National Assembly has approved amendments to the Information and Communications Network Act, which the ruling Democratic Party calls the act to eradicate false and manipulated information. The bill defines what counts as illegal online content and seeks to ban its distribution. According to reports, it targets content that promotes violence, discrimination, or hatred against individuals or groups based on factors such as race, nationality, or social and economic status. Those most directly affected are expected to be media outlets and online content creators, including YouTubers. If found guilty, courts can impose punitive damages of up to 5 times the actual harm caused. President Lee Jae-myung earlier this month told foreign media that many claims circulating online are clearly false, yet used as tools for incitement, and said they must be stopped.
우리가 가치 판단의 영역, 그러니까 팩트가 아니고 의견의 영역은 손대지 않는다. 뭐 욕을 하든 비방을 하든 상관없다. 팩트의 영역에서는 명백한 허위를 가지고 공격하는 거, 편을 만들어서 사회를 분열시키는 거, 이거는 제재해야 된다. 이건 표현의 자유 영역에서 벗어나는 거다 이렇게 생각합니다.
The Democratic Party passed the bill on Wednesday, despite strong backlash from the main opposition People Power Party, which called it a super gag law and launched a filibuster.
민주당은 이 법안이 정보통신망을 통해 확산되는 불법 정보와 허위 정보로부터 피해자를 보호하기 위한 것이라고 주장합니다. 그러나 그 내용을 들여다보면 이 법안은 피해자를 보호하기 위한 법이 아니라 국민의 자유로운 여론 형성과 정부 비판을 봉쇄하기 위한 법입니다.
Meanwhile, a group of lawyers calling itself the Freedom and Human Rights Working Group has petitioned South Korea's National Human Rights Commission to recommend changes to or the repeal of the law. The group argues the bill uses vague definitions that could enable state censorship and restrict freedom of expression. Supporters of the bill say it will help curb harmful disinformation. But critics say the concern is not just what counts as false information, but who ultimately gets to decide what is false and what is not. The bill has to be approved or vetoed by the president within 15 days. Lim Yun-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Our parents of the suspect accused of a deadly stabbing rampage in Taiwan have apologized, pledging full cooperation with investigators. Well, the incident left 4 people, including the suspect, dead and 11 others injured.
把张文所犯下的那个滔天大祸，对社会造成严重的损害，以及对受害人及其家人造成无法弥补的伤害和痛苦。我们想在此向大家说对不起，对不起。
The parents knelt outside a funeral parlour where the suspect's autopsy was conducted, expressing remorse for their son's actions. The 27-year-old, identified as Chang Wen, set off smoke bombs at Taipei's main metro station before launching a series of stabbings. Police say they have preliminarily ruled out terrorism, though the motive remains unclear. Authorities believe Chang acted alone. He was unemployed and relied on family support. Investigators say Chang rented an apartment near the main station earlier this year and scouted the area before the attack. They also found online searches related to random killings, including material linked to a 2014 Taipei metro stabbing. Well, the deadly attack, which took place amid the year-end holiday season, has prompted authorities to raise security on the island to its highest level in years. CNA's senior correspondent, Victoria Jen, with this report.
The Christmas decorations are up, and the shoppers are out. Taipei may look festive, but this year, the mood feels different. A sense of caution lingers, just days after a deadly knife attack in the city. This is Zhongshan District, one of Taipei's busiest shopping areas. On the surface, it may look like business as usual, but many people tell me they're paying closer attention to their surroundings. Authorities say that Taiwan remains safe, but they're urging the public to stay alert as holiday events draw huge crowds. Friday's attack is still fresh in the minds of many. Metro stations in central Taipei, where the attackers set off smoke grenades and carried out the stabbings, now turn into tribute sites. Many laying flowers, leaving handwritten notes, and remembering those who lost their lives. Authorities are also on high alert.
所以针对接下来的各项大型活动，甚至人潮聚集的商圈以及场域，我们维安规格都提升。
Officers have been deployed not just in Taipei, but across the island, at metro stations, railway hubs, and shopping areas. More than 17,000 police and security personnel will also be deployed to nearly 140 major events in the lead-up to Chinese New Year in February.
希望大家可以平安啊。
这周的圣诞节会影响你的规划吗？
有一点，就是有点不敢去台北车站，
因为台湾治安是很好的，是我们还是相信台湾，对，治安。
Taipei's year-end countdown typically draws hundreds of thousands of people. Ahead of the event, the city's mayor says security drills will be carried out at selected transport hubs, including simulations of an emergency response to an attack.
所以观察局跟警察局也都有对外说明，包括我们会设置车组以及特勤的警力，再加上保安警力的支援，也会有包括各项的事前地毯式的常检，包括金属探测器、侦爆犬等等。
In the wake of the December 19 attack, police say several suspects have been detained for violent acts and making threats. Officials are also asking the public to refrain from spreading unverified information, warning that false threats can create unnecessary panic. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
Well, meantime, some breaking news out of Taiwan. A magnitude 6.1 quake has struck southwestern Taitung County. Now, the shaking can be felt as far as Taipei. And, of course, we'll be having the latest updates as the story develops. Well, in other news, China and Russia have expressed support for Venezuela at the United Nations during an Emergency Security Council meeting initiated by Caracas. Beijing slamming Washington for interfering in the South American nation's affairs.
美方行径严重侵犯他国主权安全和合法权益，严重违反联合国宪章和国际法，威胁拉美和加勒比地区和平与安全。越来越多的地区国家和域外国家对美方行径表示严重关切和强烈谴责。
Beijing and Moscow have slammed Washington for, quote, cowboy behavior meant to intimidate Venezuela. China also accusing the U.S. of using anti-drug operations as a pretext to deploy more military forces in the waters near the South American nation. Now, the U.S. defended its actions, saying that it wants to protect its borders from Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's, quote, narco-terrorist activities.
The reality of the situation is that sanctioned oil tankers operate as the primary economic lifeline for Maduro and his illegitimate regime. The sanctioned tankers also fund the narco-terrorist group Cartel de los Soles. Maduro is responsible for trafficking, using these resources and using these profits into both the United States and Europe.
Well, according to the Pentagon, the U.S. has conducted more than 24 strikes against alleged drug boats near Venezuela since September, killing more than 100 people in international waters in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Our break's up next, but coming up on East Asia tonight, ETF surge powers record growth in China's fund market, with assets surging past $820 billion. And a major hurdle cleared for Korea Zinc's U.S. smelter plan. The South Korean court rejects request to block its share sale. More details next.
From vibrant cities to ancient empires, journey across Asia's most captivating landscapes and the stories they hold. This January on CNA. Discover how the new generation is transforming life after dark. From drone-lit skylines to immersive cultural parks.
就我会觉得价值不一定是你要产出东西，有可能是你给了别人一些快乐。
Meet the innovators powering China's night boom. In Asian communities, salt is a source of a rich tapestry of artisanal and innovative culinary craft and production. Explore the ingenuity and traditions that elevate this everyday mineral into a cultural treasure in Salt of the Earth. And travel back in time with Peter Lee.
Some years ago, this place was considered too dangerous even for tourists.
To unravel the secrets behind Asia's ancient kingdoms and the legacies that shape the region's identity in The Mark of Empire, Kingdoms of the Sea. This January on CNA.
Right in a chaotic moment.
Midnight later tonight here in Thailand, it's too little too late.
And I asked whether there's a political element to it. Nobody can exactly tell you why.
Look, things are never perfect when you're engaged in politics. Each one doing what each one wants.
So what's the United Nations doing amidst this world of supreme chaos?
We're pushing for answers every night on Asia Tonight.
Hello again. We are back on East Asia tonight, and we've got Henry in standing by with the very latest in business news. So, Henry, apparently China is seeing surging demand for ETFs as investors are seeking ways to secure their assets. Tell us more.
Well, that's right, I'll tell you. And those funds also become top pick for institutional investors as they hope to mitigate market volatility. So, China's publicly offered funds surging to record levels this year, driven by rapid growth in exchange-traded funds and strong investor appetite for innovation-linked products. Financial data provider Wind Information says the size of China's ETF market has climbed to nearly 5.8 trillion yuan, or about $821 billion, up more than 50% since the start of 2025. That marks a sharp acceleration. Well, the market expanded from 4 to 5 trillion yuan in just 4 months, compared with 14 years to reach the first trillion. Well, much of the growth came from Sci-Tech Innovation Bond ETFs, with 2 batches launched mid-year. And 24 such funds now manage more than $36 billion, nearly 4 times their initial issuance. And China has also seen strong gains in fund of funds products. New FOFs raised over $11 billion this year alone, exceeding total issuance from the previous 3 years combined. While Chinese aircraft maker COMAC's ambition to be a global player still face a long taxiway to take off, given that it managed to deliver only 13 of its C919 jet this year so far, half of its goal of 25, which was revised down from the original annual target of 75. its deliveries pale in comparison to Airbus and Boeing. Well, the C919 is positioned as a competitor to Airbus A320, which delivered 510 jets as of November, while Boeing also delivered 330 of its 737 jet through to September. Well, Airbus and Boeing are facing a shortage of parts, leading to a production backlog in the thousands. And COMAC has been looking to plug the supply gap for single-aisle jets, but it too has faced hurdles. Well, the U.S. temporarily imposed export controls on jet engines to China, hampering COMAC's production capabilities. Well, the Chinese plane maker's ambitions of selling its jet overseas has also stalled over airworthiness certification from American and European regulators. A U.S. investigation has flagged unfair trade practices in China's chip sector, but Washington is opting not to impose new tariffs for now. The nearly year-long trade probe said China used heavy state support to gain dominance in older, widely used chips found in vehicles, medical equipment, and telecom systems. They add China relied on policies that distort normal market competition. The USTR review concluded that Beijing's policies in the semiconductor industry are unreasonable and restricts American commercial activity and is therefore actionable. Tariffs between the two nations, though, will remain unchanged for the next 18 months, with the option of future action in 2027. Now, Beijing registering its discontent over the probe findings and saying it will oppose any tariffs on chips and vow to take measures to safeguard its rights and interests.
中方坚决反对美方滥施关税，无理打压中国产业。美方的做法扰乱全球产供链稳定，阻碍各国半导体产业的发展，损人害己。
For CNA, Iris Spitzer explains the trade and diplomatic backdrop behind America's decision to postpone new semiconductor tariffs on China.
What you're seeing here is a desire from the U.S. side to maintain the somewhat fragile truce, a trade truce that the leaders of China and the U.S. Agreed personally on in South Korea a couple months ago. We, of course, tensions at very high levels before that with the threat from the Chinese side of withholding those exports of rare minerals, which are so crucial to supply chains globally that the U.S. depends on. So that really helped de-escalate things with that meeting in South Korea. So the Trump administration likely not keen to kind of start that escalation cycle once again. Another issue here is that applying tariffs on these semiconductors, and this is not the super advanced semiconductors that are used in AI applications that are also an issue of dispute between the two countries. These are some of the more legacy ones that are used in all sorts of things, from cars to aircrafts and really tons of electronics. So to impose tariffs potentially on those could also disrupt supply chains in a negative way for U.S. producers. So I think here what we're seeing is, again, the strategy from the U.S. side of perhaps having some potential ammunition, so to speak, in future trade talks with this assessment that China is using unfair trade practices, allegations that China denies, but not really wanting to take any further action at the moment to kind of maintain peace between the two countries on trade.
A South Korean court has rejected an attempt by two major shareholders of Korean Zinc to block the company's plan to issue new shares to fund a multi-billion-dollar smelter project in the U.S. The Seoul Central District Court ruled that the share sale could proceed, clearing the way for Korea Zinc's proposed $7.4 billion critical minerals refinery in Tennessee. The decision sent Korea Zinc shares up as much as 5% before it pared those gains and ended about 2.3% in the red, while shares of Yongpeng, one of the opposing shareholders, fell more than 10% and ended the day around that level. Well, the world's largest refined zinc producer plans to raise about $1.9 billion by selling new shares to a U.S. government-backed joint venture. which would take a roughly 10% stake in the company. Well, the firm says the project will help cut U.S. reliance on China for critical minerals that are used in chips, electronics, as well as weapons. But major shareholders MBK Partners and Yongpeng, which together own about 46%, said they were disappointed, warning of share dilution, though they pledged support for the project. The court said the deal strengthens U.S.-led efforts to reshape critical mineral supply chains and deepen cooperation between South Korea and the United States. Safe haven gold touching a record high, crossing the 4,500 level for the first time during the session. Right now, gold is still hovering slightly below the 4,500 level we mentioned, and the milestone comes amid rising geopolitical tensions, including the situation in Venezuela, where the U.S. has blockaded oil tankers, and expectations for more rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Well, the bullion has risen more than 70% so far this year as investors rush for safety in the face of global uncertainty. The surge also thanks in part to easing policy, strong central bank buying, as well as robust investment demand. Oil prices higher also on those same concerns. Traders weighing the risk of disruptions to oil supply from Venezuela and Russia, and stronger than expected U.S. economic growth, filling bets of more easing next year. Brent at 62.43 level over there, while WTI trading slightly above water at the moment. Well, India is polishing a new gem in its economic crown, and lab-grown diamonds. Well, it's not quite outshining the natural diamonds market yet, but analysts say it's growing at nearly 15% a year. And India hopes to capitalize on that as the world's leading integrated diamond hub. Ishan Garg filed this report from New Delhi.
Jeweler Shaurya Taneja sees the future in these stones. Nearly half of the pieces he sells are made from diamonds, not mined but grown in laboratories. They sparkle as brightly as natural ones, but don't quite cut so deep into the pockets of a younger, price-conscious generation. These synthetic diamonds can sell for anywhere between 50 to 90% less than mined diamonds. That means if a 1-carat natural diamond sells for $1,000, the lab-grown version of similar quality could be as low as a few $100s.
You won't be too sad if the diamond falls out or if you lose a diamond, because you could just get it as easily replaced and at a cheaper price point. But otherwise, if you lost a natural diamond, for say, unless and until you have the natural diamond insured, you would basically have to spend the $20,000 or $30,000 again to get that diamond back.
There's an added appeal beyond the price point. Lab-grown diamonds don't carry the ethical baggage of the mined version, which have been associated with financing conflict, human rights abuses, and environmental damage. Here's some more clarity on the market potential. Industry data projects India's lab-grown diamond market could more than triple, from $400 million today to over $1.5 billion in a matter of 10 years. While it likely won't come close to China's market, which still dominates synthetic diamond production globally, India's strength lies in its centuries-old diamond cutting and polishing industry, unsurpassed by any other country. India cuts and polishes 90% of the world's diamonds, both natural and synthetic. Much of that happens here in Surat city, Gujarat state, India's major diamond hub, where lab-grown diamonds are cut and polished alongside their natural cousins. But to grow its own diamonds, India is betting on chemical vapor deposition, or CVD technology. It's a cleaner, high-tech method that India hopes could make the country the one-stop shop for lab-grown diamonds, bolstered by government support, R&D, and lower importing duties on diamonds.
How they can compete with China, a unique position of integration. If you think about what India can offer is design, grow, cut, and set. So it's from really take the whole integrated perspective, be a jewelry designer, from growing the stones to selling finished jewelry to the markets in Europe, US, everywhere else.
But at home, technology still clashes with tradition. For weddings and heirlooms, many Indians still view natural diamonds as the only stone of value and won't let synthetic versions color their judgment.
हम लोग अपने बच्चों के भविष्य के लिए है ना इन्वेस्टमेंट करते हैं, तो लेब्रॉन वगैरह आर्टिफिशियल में गिना जाता है. आर्टिफिशियल का रेट डाउन ही होना है, कम होता है, बढ़ेगा नहीं आगे जाके. इसके लिए हम लोग रियल डायमंड में ही इन्वेस्टमेंट करते हैं बच्चों के लिए, ताकि उनको जाके आगे काम आवे उनके.
रियल डायमंड सर, इसकी वैल्यू या इसका कंपैरिजन किसी के साथ नहीं किया जा सकता. तो मैं तो यही बोलूँगा, अगर आपको लेना है तो भले छोटा लो, छोटा कैरेट वाला लो.
But entrepreneurs like Shaurya say the math is simple. When the diamond is identical, why pay the premium? For CNA, I'm Ishan Garg in New Delhi.
And that's the latest in Business. I'll tell you, back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Henry. Well, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up next, a look at the key events that shaped East Asia this year. And I will be speaking to an expert on what to expect in 2026.
Many a times, the hawkers themselves don't want their children to go into the hawking business.
所以你们要珍惜我，珍惜我的档口了，因为快点来吃了 ，before 它消失了。
You can't just exist on nostalgia. It's got to win over a whole new generation of people who actually want to eat the dish.
If it's not us, who else will preserve our heritage food?
News Stirrings Part 1, Saturday on CNA.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. South Korea passes a new law targeting the online spread of fake news that critics warn could enable state censorship and restrict freedom of expression. The parents of a man accused of a stabbing rampage in Taiwan apologize and vows full cooperation as police continue to probe the suspect's motive. And a 6.1 magnitude earthquake has rattled Taiwan's southeastern coastal county of Taitung in the last hour. The shaking could be felt as far as capital Taipei, some 250 kilometers away. Officials say there were no immediate reports of damage. From a global tariff war to bilateral spats, East Asia saw significant power shifts and events in 2025. And tonight, we look at the key moments. One, U.S. President Donald Trump took office in January and announced China tariffs almost right off the bat. Even allies Japan and South Korea were not spared. Now Beijing fired back, setting off an escalating tit-for-tat. And tariffs on both sides went up more than 100% before an extended truce and rounds of U.S.-China trade talks in different capitals around the world. Now that truce is still in place. Well, East Asia also marked 80 years after the end of World War II, and China showed off massive firepower at its biggest ever military parade in September. President Xi Jinping stood with Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un at the event in a show of unity against the West and, of course, demonstration of China's geopolitical clout. Well, elsewhere in the neighborhood, change at the very top after political crises. South Korea has a new president, Lee Jae-myung, who's vowed to make peace with the North. Now, his ousted predecessor, Yoon Suk-yeol, under arrest and facing trial for his short-lived martial law. And over in Japan, a new Iron Lady, Sanae Takaichi, took the reins after Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba stepped down to answer for the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's worst poll showing in years. Now, weeks after she's sworn in, Ms. Takaichi triggered Japan's biggest diplomatic uproar with China in years. She hinted that Tokyo could take military action if China attacked Taiwan. All this while her government continues to push for record defense spending. Now, for more insights, we are joined by Stephen Nagy, Professor of Politics and International Studies from the International Christian University. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. So, picking up from what I just said, that we have seen all these flashpoints from Ms. Takaichi's Taiwan comments to East China Sea incidents, etc. Professor, where then, or what do you see as the main driver in China-Japan tensions in 2026 and why?
So 2026 will be driven by the same factors that I think have been driving the increased tensions in 2025. Insecurity at home for Beijing as the economy is slowing. Structural issues continue to pile on each other. And I think that there's growing, unrest and uncertainty in China with the direction of the country and the economic challenges it faces. And that puts tremendous pressure on the ruling government, and in particular Xi Jinping, who is the man at the top, to do something that, will push China forward. And I think they've very much taken advantage and manipulated Prime Minister Takaichi's comments about a Taiwan contingency requiring some kind of a security approach by Japan. And I think that is, that is certainly driving part of the tensions. But also they see Takaichi as a strong prime minister, a prime minister that could push back and strengthen relations with the U.S., and exert leadership in the broader region. And I think from China's perspective, this is not good. And this is why they've engaged in a massive disinformation campaign and economic coercion to try and really unseat Takaichi and really install some kind of revolving door of prime ministers that is weak domestically, weak on the international front. That hurts the U.S.-Japan alliance, and that's good for China.
Now, zooming out, of course, the biggest strategic relationship in the region is still U.S.-China. So looking ahead, which fault line do you think is most likely to define U.S.-China tension relations?
Well, what we're looking at in terms of bilateral relations between the U.S. and China is the hope that there'll be some kind of trade deal in the coming months. President Trump has agreed to visit Beijing in a warmer season, maybe April, May. We'll see how that goes. And then Xi Jinping, the Secretary General of the Communist Party, has agreed to reciprocate the visit to the United States. So I think what we can read from these potential agreements, that's not normal for the Chinese to agree so far ahead of a meeting, to come to a meeting, is that they're both putting on a truce, a short-term truce, until they can collect themselves and move to the next level of friction. And what I mean by that is I think that whatever happens in terms of a trade truce, they're going to go back to competing, because they're competing about technology, in particular AI and quantum computing. They want to be the dominant party in developing those technologies so that they can create the next 21st century economy. But not only the economy, but culture, medicines, that's that important stuff that goes in the military. Whoever wins this technological race over the long term really will significantly shift, I think, how our economies work, the international order, and it will probably strengthen each of their systems, or one of the systems, depending on who is the dominant player in that race.
Now to the region's biggest potential flashpoint, which is Taiwan. How do you see cross-strait tensions evolving in the new year? And what sort of indicators would tell you that Beijing is recalibrating its approach towards Taiwan?
Well, we should always remember that the top officials in China, the top leaders, have reiterated year by year that they support peaceful reunification with Taiwan, but they don't eschew the use of force. That continues to be the case. But what we've seen is China, through its buildup of the PLA and acquiring the resources and the skills and the equipment to get to really be able to have a forced reunification if it's necessary. And they're going to continue to build those capacities because they want to compel Taiwan to come back to how they understand the motherland is as soon as possible. Now, on the Taiwan side, and they continue to say the same thing, that they want peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. They would like the status quo to continue to emerge. And, officials and leaders are very, 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 very sensitive to not sending any other signal, for example, pursuit of independence or a declaration of independence. So the Taiwanese are going to be tremendously nuanced in the coming year, and the Chinese are going to continue to say that we want reunification as soon as possible. The challenge is that reunifying with China today in its current political context is not so attractive for the Taiwanese, and I think from the Taiwanese perspective, they are still wanting to maintain their political system, their civil society, their freedom of press, and their rule of law system. So we have a huge amount of incompatibility between the two sides. But I think on both sides of the straits, they don't want war. They want peace, and they want to maintain the status quo, but ensure that Taiwan doesn't slip away in terms of its identity or in some kind of independence.
Well, we've also got the bigger strategic backdrop in terms of an arms buildup across the region. We've seen defense postures expanding, and also that new START, which is expiring in February 2026, meaning there's going to be less transparency between the US and Russia. But how do you think all of that possibly could alter the stability in East Asia?
So I think we should always remember that the biggest spender in terms of defense spending is China. It's about $250 to $260 billion a year in the region. I'm excluding the United States, but half of that is for domestic security. So China is worried more about domestic security issues than outside security issues. And then we have Southeast Asian countries, whether it's the Philippines, Vietnam, and others. They're investing in defense spending. But where I think the biggest area of concern is those gray zone and hybrid tactics that are primarily used by the Chinese. But we also see, some of the states in Southeast Asia also making claims and building islands and doing these controversial things that are creating instability within the region. So, in the coming year, what I worry about is some kind of accidental escalation that's associated with gray zone and hybrid tactics. Then countries are investing in these areas, whether they're merchant ships or otherwise, because they're better ways to achieve your security interests without escalating to a military conflict. And this is the area that I think we should watch. This is where the capabilities are going to be spent. And it's not going to just be in the South China Sea. It's going to be across the Taiwan Strait and the East China Sea as well.
Oh, lots of risks and signals to watch in the coming year. Thanks so very much for your insights, Professor Stephen Nagy from the International Christian University. Now, US President Trump's tariffs war has severely impacted global logistics and supply chains. Some industry watchers are even warning of a new low in freight volumes, even with the peak US holiday season. But lower freight volumes are just one challenge for the global shipping industry.
Hong Kong, one of the world's busiest ports, is hosting an unusual group of visitors, more than 100 of them joining a tour of the port facilities organized by the Maritime Professional Promotion Federation. The association wants to get the next generation interested in the sea and hopefully join the industry.
我長大後想當船員，因為咧做船員係要一個負責心嘅人去做，而我覺得自己咧有負責心，所以我就想做船員。
For 20-year-old Sean, his dream is to become a boat captain. But not many of his classmates share his ambition. He's seen a number in his cohort drop out of the 2-year program.
我哋之前1年級咧就有29個嘅，不過而家上到嚟2年級就剩翻大概19個左右。之所以咁多人離開嘅原因咧，可能 有啲人就可能因為唔肯定啊，可能發覺讀完呢1年之後咧，就開始對呢行就冇咁大信心，就驚想試下轉行。有啲咧就可能因為多咗人際關係，例如可能多咗女朋友，就怕出咗海行完船之後就可能冇咗女朋友，所以就決定唔行船咁樣。
Outside school enthusiasm has been waning as well. In Hong Kong, the number of people working in the shipping industry dropped by about 5% in 2024 from 2020. The industry is seeing a talent shortage, and it's a big concern for companies such as ship management services provider Fleet Management Limited, which has a presence in major ports in Asia.
At the moment, we have about 8% shortage of that, and this is predicted to grow to 10% in the next 5 to 10 years. So you're talking about shortage which is becoming broader.
Shipping activity is out of sight for most people, and it's easy to neglect its importance.
Even in the current geopolitical scenarios, global trade is increasing. South-South trade, for example, is increasing, and shipping provides or moves more than 80% of global trade, silent guardians of global trade, right? So when you look at it growing, there's a growing population need for manpower into this industry, but the pace of bridging the gap is not fast enough. It needs to move. It needs to accelerate faster.
Accelerate. That's what the Hong Kong Polytechnic University is trying to do. It's the city's only university that offers maritime studies.
We have arranged different activities to educate our students that they can have their career choice as seafarers. Because after their seafarers trainings, they could choose to work in companies like some shipping lines and shipbroker and chartering company, and also they may consider further their study as well. At the same time, for students who really want to develop their career, in the long term, they may go all the way become captain with like 8 to 10 years.
Spending months out at sea is a tough commitment for many. But final year shipping student Ao Man Shan finds stability in it. He wants to work as a marine officer.
The promotion path is very clear in the marine department. As you get class 3, you can interview to be an assistant marine officer. Class 2, you can be a marine controller, something like that, and you get class 1, you can be a marine officer. It's a very clear promotion path. And my friends, my girlfriend is also supporting me to be a seafarer. As I just maybe go to seagoing for about 2 to 3 years, then I will get back onshore to continue my journey as in the marine department.
Many young Chinese are facing uncertainty after graduation. But for Ao, he's set to sail into an industry hungry for talent.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, how the latest setback to China's attempt to reuse rockets will affect the nation's space ambitions. Plus, laughter, the key to this Japanese ritual for a better year ahead.
The CNA Summit 2026. Today's leaders face converging pressures, shifting geopolitics and capital flows, digital and AI acceleration, and rising calls for inclusive growth. How do leaders turn capital into viable projects and sustain execution across Indonesia's and the regional markets? The CNA Summit 2026, coming soon in February. Organised by MediaCorp.
On this episode of Singapore Hour, an engineering graduate turned ballet dancer. Meet the soloist breaking conventions.
I don't dance for perfection. It's not about getting things right. It's about appreciating the answer that you're given
No waves? No problem. This might just get you hooked on surfing in Singapore.
I've tried wakeboarding before, but this is a different ballgame.
You don't want to miss Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
Prices are ridiculous, and that man that's up there in that White House needs to go.
Political pressure at home as global power play intensifies. Crises, competition and conflict across every continent.
That's why the whole world is looking at us.
How will the world respond in 2026? Monday on CNA.
China failed its second attempt at completing a reusable rocket test yesterday. A state-run CASC said that the first stage of its Long March 12A rocket was, quote, not successfully recovered, in a setback to the nation's space ambition as it seeks to close the gap with U.S. firm SpaceX. Details of the failed recovery, including its cause, were not disclosed, but CASC said that it was conducting further analysis and troubleshooting on the incident. Well, for more, Quentin Parker joins us live from Hong Kong. He's an astrophysicist based at the University of Hong Kong and also the director of the Laboratory for Space Research. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us today. First up, help us understand about this Long March recovery failure and what does this setback actually reveal about China's perhaps bottleneck in terms of reusability?
Well, this is the second unsuccessful attempt to recover a stage of a rocket. Now, the first one was actually a Zhukui 3 rocket from Landspace, which is a commercial Chinese company. And this is a Long March 12A that failed yesterday, which is a different, state-owned. So there's two different rockets here, both of which are attempting to recover a stage like SpaceX is able to do on a regular basis now. But there are many Chinese companies which are developing reusable rockets because China's going to be putting up major satellite constellations where reusable rockets are going to be able to drive the price down in exactly the same model that SpaceX has successfully demonstrated now for a few years. So that's the game, is doing that. They failed again. The first one, the Landspace Zhukui 3, actually got very close to its landing spot on re-entry, but it just didn't quite make it. This one, I haven't got enough details on the Long March 12 failure. I mean, both rockets got their payloads into orbit successfully, which is what all rockets used to do before the reusable epoch came in under Elon Musk. So China's trying to catch up with that technology. It's got not just one player, it's got several different actors attempting to do this independently, it would seem. And so this is another failure. Now, don't forget Starship under Elon Musk has been failing multiple times in the last year or so to get its rockets up into orbit properly for the Artemis program, etc. So this is just another setback. So I expect China will keep going and catch up, and I'm sure they will have successful recovery of the first stages soon.
Well, there are claims, Professor, that, people saying like China being 10 years behind US. We hear that getting thrown about. Firstly, what are your thoughts on that?
Depends what you mean by behind in what area. If you're talking about reusable rockets, then I don't think it's anything like 10 years. I think they'll be able to demonstrate this within a couple of years, maybe sooner, based on a previous track record of what China attempts to do and what then it achieves. So I don't believe that China is 10 years behind the West in its reusable rocket technology. I think it will catch up much quicker than that. Certainly within 5 years, I expect there to be regular launches of reusable rockets across many different companies, potentially, in China.
Yeah, so that brings us to Washington's urgency. New NASA chief Jared Isaacman, his recent comments on America's return to the moon before its great rival, China, which is targeting a crewed landing before 2030. So, Professor, what are the stakes of losing the moon race?
It depends who you talk to, really, and which opinions you give more attention to. There's a lot of opinions out there. First, about whether China or America will get back to the moon first in terms of human landing on the moon. I've been looking into this a little bit, and it's clear there's quite a diversity of opinion. But quite a lot of experts now in both America and elsewhere around the world and in China believe that China could well get there first. there are quite a few problems with the Artemis refueling system and the plans, and even the lander and things like that. And NASA, of course, has undergone a lot of recent turmoil and change and lots of people coming and going at top levels, and this new appointments, this new, you could say, political appointment on NASA that has a certain message to get across. So it's quite complicated. China's a bit simpler because you don't have the turmoil and the churn in positions and jurisdictions every few years at the moment. So you have a lot more stability in able to plan and etc. So I think that's a strong advantage in China's favor in terms of that kind of stability in planning. In NASA, I've got friends that work in NASA, and I know that there's been some issues with personnel and change, and also some problems and delays in various parts of their Artemis program. So it's not clear. I mean, look, America, if it really puts its mind to it and really goes gung-ho, hell for leather, straight out, want to get there first, I'm sure that they could do a very good chance. But the actual reality is a lot more complicated in terms of the technologies and, testing and the readiness of the incredible infrastructure that's needed to return man to the moon.
So, but nevertheless, you're saying that China actually does have a chance of landing on the moon before the U.S. That's very interesting. I want to bring in Japan and South Korea to do with the East Asian bloc. Where do they sit, in this space race? What sort of capabilities or areas do you think could let them punch above their weight?
Yes, it's true. Everybody talks about the great competition and rivalry between the Chinese space program and its plan for the International Lunar Research Station and the West, led by America, for the Artemis program, and the different countries that signed up to both. But let's not forget, they're not the only games in town. Roscosmos on Russia has a long track record of successful missions to the moon and elsewhere. And you've got India, which is another major power emerging now in space, more so than Japan and South Korea. But Japan has a proud history. It's got its own independent launch capability, and South Korea is developing it too. There's quite a few little players around. Even New Zealand is launching rockets or attempting to. So there's quite a lot of new players, emerging players, but the largest players remain the United States and now China. That's overtaken Russia's second place there. And of course, don't forget the Europeans still have rocket capability through the Ariane series of rockets. They haven't launched so many in the last few years compared to the great uptick in launch capacity of both America under SpaceX in particular, which is a private company. You've got a private company under Elon Musk basically taking over the large bulk of all of America's launch capacity. Then in China, you've got, CASC and CNSA and these, but you've got lots of now new companies emerging in China that are attempting to do solid rockets, launching from platforms at sea, reusable rockets. These are all in the mix now from China too. So Japan, South Korea, small players, but capable, technologically developed nations with a lot of expertise. And don't forget, Japan has gone to asteroids, brought back samples. So it's got quite a lot of capacity, but it's not got the clout in terms of, the numbers of launches, and the large-scale infrastructure that, China's got 4 major launch bases now, including a commercial one that's just being developed in Hainan Island, south of Hong Kong.
Fascinating insights, as always. Thank you so much for your time and thoughts, spending your Christmas Eve with us. Quentin Parker, astrophysicist based at the University of Hong Kong. Well, finally, a year-end ritual in Japan is turning laughter into prayer in the hopes of happier and brighter days ahead. A priest leads the ceremony at a shrine in Osaka, breaking into laughter with thousands of participants following suit. The laughing goes on for the next 20 minutes. Well, the ritual is rooted in Japanese myth, based on the story of how Shinto gods used their laughter to draw the sun goddess Amaterasu out of a cave, thus restoring light to the world. Organizers say the ceremony is less about humor and more about endurance and unity, as it requires participants to keep laughing, regardless of physical discomfort or self-consciousness.
毎年このご神事に参加すると幸せになるから笑いっぱなしです。みんなが笑うと世界が平和になるから、それで一緒に笑いに来ました。
一緒にみんなで笑いに来ました。
お互いが密になって、お互いが助け合って、幸せになる。で、笑うことによって免疫力が上がるので、健康ですよ。ね、若々しく綺麗になります。
And that wraps up East Asia Tonight for this year. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.